Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's special City Council meeting. We certainly are pleased to have everybody here in attendance tonight. Today is Tuesday, December 26th. We'll start our meeting by introducing you to your City Council.
Council members Erickson.
Here.
Erpenbach.
Here.
Kiley.
Here.
Neitzert.
Here.
Rolfing.
Here.
Selberg.
Here.
Starr.
Here.
Staley.
Here.
Councilors, thanks so much for being here tonight. We appreciate it. We would like you to stand, please, for our Pledge of Allegiance. Councilors, thank you. Item number one.
Item number one, deferred from the City Council meeting on Tuesday, December 19, 2017. A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a golf course management agreement between the City of Sioux Falls and Landscape Management Company, LLC. And Mr. Mayor, I'll just note for the record that the current motion on the table at the conclusion of this item last time on December 19, 2017 is to adopt the item.
Thank you, Tom. Council, with your permission, I'm just going to briefly go through where we got to this point. There is a resolution that you folks are considering, the resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a golf course management agreement between the City of Sioux Falls and Landscape Management Company. At last week's meeting, there were presentations that were presented by members of the administration. There was also public input on the item. I'm not going to go through that public input in terms of a summary of that. After the public input, I turn it over to the City Council. The councilors then had their opportunity to address the citizens on this particular topic. Later on, there was a motion made by Councilmember Michelle Erpenbach and seconded by Councilmember Christine Erickson to adopt item number 39. And for the folks at home, that is now item number 1 today. A motion was then made by Councilmember Teresa Staley and seconded by Councilmember Michelle Erpenbach to defer item 39 for 1 year and to extend for 1 year a contract with Dakota Golf Management. Then a substitute motion was made by Councilmember Pat Starr to defer item 39 to the City Council meeting of Tuesday, January 2nd, 2018 at 7 p.m. That motion died for lack of a second. Then later on, a substitute motion was made by Councilmember Rex Rolfing and seconded by Councilmember Pat Starr to substitute motion to defer item 39 to a City Council meeting of Tuesday, December 26, 2017, which of course is today. That vote passed 8-0, so the motion passed, and that brings us here today. What we would like to do is, again, in respect to all of you for being here, we want to thank you for being here. We would respectfully ask that if there are items that you would like to discuss, just like we talked about last week, folks, and I know that not all of you were here, and I certainly understand that, but there were a number of items that were covered last week's meeting. It was very, very good. Very professional, very respectful. We appreciate that. If there are other items that you would like to talk about, we would ask that you come forward. If they are unique, if they are different, that will certainly make the meeting tonight even more productive. But we would ask that you just please state your name, keep your comments to 5 minutes or less, and if you could address the council as a whole versus addressing them individually, the council would appreciate that. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak to the council? Welcome.
Ryan Jansa is my name, Mr. Mayor, councilors. Here tonight to tell you, the RFP process itself, we view as having great value. Some of you have been on those processes. Counselors, fellow counselors have been through those processes. We understand there's a great value there. Overall, it serves the citizens of Sioux Falls very, very well. We understand that, and I appreciate all the hard work and dedication that those that serve on those RFPs go through, because we know that they can be very complex and time consuming. So for those, we appreciate that a great deal. Invested a lot of time in the process. The RFP process itself is proven. We see that on multiple occasions. But we also know that, what we witnessed last week and what you're seeing here tonight, that, this process, the democratic process is also a vital part in what you do as elected officials and what we all hope from our elected officials. And so we just don't want that particular portion to be discounted as well. So appreciate your time. Thank you.
Ryan, thank you as much. Welcome. Please. Oh,
Ladies first. Can I just start this, Jim?
Jim, would you just stay up here, please? Thank you, sir. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Sue Simons. And let's just start with, I will echo what Mr. Jansen said, that the RFP process is a good process when done appropriately, fairly, and within the confines of the law. However, when the need or premise for the need of an RFP is faulty, the entire process begins on a less than solid foundation. This RFP was recommended because there hadn't been one for a long time, and no other reason. But it didn't have to be now. You will hear, and you've heard enough about the timing of the RFP. I'm going to talk a little bit about the law and the compliance and what options maybe you do have today. And I want to start with no decision that you make, and I can't imagine the decisions you make, is free from risk. But the real question is, where's the greater risk? So we start with the RFP section 507. And we see in there that it gives the city the right to cancel the RFP at any time prior to entering into a formal agreement. So the real question is, do we have a formal agreement? And you don't have to look any further than the city ordinance of 36.021 that says no contract pertaining to management of the city's public facilities will be valid unless the contract has been authorized by the vote of the city council at a duly assembled meeting, which is what we are doing this evening. So we don't have a formal agreement, which means that the RFP process can be terminated at this time because there's been no formal approval. And guess what? State law agrees. No contract of a municipality is valid unless the contract has been authorized by a vote of the governing body. So we know that you have the right to say no, or actually the right to throw out the entire RFP, because that's what Section 507 said. The city reserves the right to amend, modify, withdraw the RFP, cancel it, in whole or in part, if it is deemed in the city's best interest to do so. And number 10 says you cannot award a contract as a part of or a result of this RFP process. So by the very terms of the RFP, you have a lot of options before you this evening. And it also says the city can exercise that right at any time without notice and without liability. So if the theory is, or the belief is, geez, we're kind of out of the RFP process, paragraph 10 says a contract as a result of the RFP process can be terminated at any time, and clearly the contract before you is as a result of the RFP process. Now, if you're feeling as if there's nothing you can do, I would caution that perhaps that choice or that thought would violate Park Board's creation, because they're just an advisory body to you. They don't have anything to do with policy making. That's up to you. So you do have a choice, because if you defer that choice to the Park Board, you're actually advocating your responsibility as city council members to make those policy decisions and to approve that contract. I think it's also important that you know, for all of you to know, that an RFP can be challenged. Normally, a bidder that doesn't get an RFP can't challenge an RFP, but there are certain circumstances where that can be done. And that is when, after bids are received and opened, a material change is made to the RFP. I disagree with the suggestion that was made last week that an RFP is nothing more than a guide, and that the term or contracts can be substantially modified during the contract process. And I believe those two cases from the South Dakota Supreme Court support that belief. In fact, again, the RFP itself says you can do a lot of things, but you can't change the terms of the RFP. So the questions become, was there substantial change? I think there was. Proposers were told they must have equipment, procure equipment, supply equipment, and the only time that they said anything was going to be financed from the city's management account was capital improvements. And I'm not going to go through this because it'll take a lot of time, but the word has, the word procure, and the word supply, that's where they're found in the RFP. But right now, we also have a contract that's termed that says LU is the one to negotiate, and I'm not sure why we're talking to the city about that. But here's the other thing. 2 goals, a lot of goals were listed, but 2 specifically. The first goal, the very first goal in attachment A on this RFP was to provide a guaranteed annual payment to the city for the operation of the golf courses, an operating lease. The second one, or a third one, was eliminate or reduce taxpayer support for golf course operations. The contract before you is a management contract, and the only person that has a guaranteed payment is LU. And there's more than $1 million that's going to be expended by taxpayer support for the golf course. So I do believe that also is a material change in the RFP. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, very much. Appreciate it. Welcome.
Mr. Mayor, Council, my name is Jim Lowe. I listened to the testimony last week in its entirety, and I don't believe there was anyone who spoke on behalf of the committee who was selected to make the decision. I was on that committee with Don Kearney, Tracy Turback, Councilor Marshall Solberg, Sioux Falls Recreation Board, Loretta Lindquist, R.J. Thompson, and myself. You need to know a little bit of our personal history. I was offended by some of the things was said about the committee on the onset. One of the things was said, it was a cult secret committee. This was a secret process, and there was a reason for that. We had 5 presenters with their financial plans in front of us that we had to analyze. It started out on a Wednesday. We came down to the library. We picked up 6 proposals, this thick at each. We poured through those proposals for 5 days. We came back the next Wednesday and we discussed those as a committee. Then we selected 4 companies to come and testify. They all came the next week. We listened to them. We asked questions. Nobody told me what questions to ask. Nobody told me how to perform. I've been in Sioux Falls since 1972. I've been a vice president of 3 banks. I've been in charge of construction, lending, and development throughout the state. I have looked at these proposals day in, day out, and I made recommendations to my board of directors, which are you in this case. We recommended certain things to this board of directors. Now, there's a lot of emotion in this whole thing. And I've known Tom Walsh, Tom Jansa, and I met Tom Evers that day. I've known them for years. I'm emotional about it too. But we followed the guidelines. We graded these companies X, Y, Z on those 10 criteria. And in front of me, when we were all done, there was 3 proposals: Tom Walsh, Tom Jansa, and Landscape. And they were very close in grading, but Landscape came out on top. It was my duty, as serving on that committee, to select the one company, and that's what we did. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jim. Welcome.
My name is Donna Haber. Councilors, mayor, city official, I applaud you for taking a week's time out to digest the conversations and concerns of last week's proceedings. In addition to being a golfer, I'm also a nurse, where timeouts are a required routine process in operating rooms at the onset of a surgery. This assures that everything is right before any procedure gets underway. Taking appropriate time and timing helps assure successful outcomes, not only in the medical world, but in wherever important decisions are being made. Thank you for stepping back and taking time before this decision tonight. Timing often relates to successes or failures. The timing of this request for proposal process has contributed to much dissatisfaction with the golf course management contract, not only with the citizens here, but also expressed by those submitting the RFPs. An RFP was discussed as far back as 2008 and then postponed again in 2013 when the decision was made to extend Dakota Golf's contract until the extensive 5-year renovation project at Elmwood was complete. The city and Dakota Golf agreed at that time that it made sense that there be time for normal operations to resume before ending that agreement with Dakota Golf and issuing an RFP. Dakota Golf Management thought that 2 to 3 years, or 2019 to 2020, of normal operation would be best for issuing an RFP process, but city officials would only agree to go through 2018. And then timing. Then at the last moment of contract renegotiation, city officials moved that date back to 2017. By doing this, they knew they would be doing the RFP with 0 years of relevant financial data available to proposers. Hardly time to step back and make an informed analysis of the data. In 2016, the city sought out services with the National Golf Foundation to provide strategic guidance for the future of the municipal golf system. This study, and its 112-page report, paid for by the taxpayers, states that 2020 would be the best time to get the best results from an RFP process. The study recommended no major policy changes before 2020 in order to establish good post-renovation data before responding to an RFP. No timeout was taken here. The city ignored the recommendations set forth by the National Golf Foundation study and plunged forward, even ignoring a workable timeline set forth in the process. That timeline called for starting an RFP process in earlier months of the calendar year, but the city had to delay even the call for RFPs since 2017 was not even the first full year of normal operations, and there was no data on a full 27-hole Elmwood golf course for several months. This rushed the entire process on the back end, and here we are today, unable to take adequate time to explore alternatives, scrambling for a solution for the cumulative consequences of poor timing and planning. Vote no on this contract and put the city back on track for an RFP process in 2020 where timing is appropriate and benefits all parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Ruth Benedict. I thank you for the opportunity to speak here tonight. I just want to talk about one specific stated goal from the RFP. This goal reads, eliminate or reduce future taxpayer support for golf course operations. That was one of the main goals listed on the RFP. Based on this goal, it is surprising to think that the city would be wanting to fund large million-dollar equipment expenses as well as pay an outside entity a management fee to operate the courses. Some things to consider from what was presented last week by city officials. First, the city's presentation last week failed to mention that originally in the equipment negotiation, it started with Dakota Golf providing the city administrators with an extensive list of assets with a value of over $1 million. The city then came back and offered $432,300 to Dakota Golf, which included $80,000 worth of pro shop merchandise, which will be resold and the money will be recouped, effectively leaving the city administrator's offer for the remaining assets for all 3 courses at $352,300. As the comptroller for the city's courses for over 22 years, I can tell you that in my opinion, that number is totally unrealistic. Less than $120,000 per course to own all outside and inside equipment doesn't seem right. We're just not talking about a couple of riding lawnmowers. We're talking about a whole array of specialized mowing and maintenance equipment, utility vehicles, driving range equipment, pro shop point-of-sale systems that are already programmed to handle all types of passes that we offer. We're talking about desks and file cabinets, you name it. Suffice to say, it takes a lot of assets to keep each course operating effectively. Again, less than $120,000 per course to have outside, inside, ready to go. Doesn't seem right, doesn't seem realistic. It should also be noted that after the city's administrator made their first low offer of the $432,300, Dakota Golf made a counteroffer, met them in the middle at the $750,000. The bottom line, the city could have owned all of Dakota Golf's assets for $750,000 and would be ready to operate next week, not March 1st, not May 1st, next week. Now, instead, the city administrators are proposing a purchase or lease of equipment and assets from outside sources for nearly the same amount, $743,000, as their first year commitment. What the administrators did not include was additional years of commitment. The $255,000 equipment lease payments for the first year also go for forward years. It's a lease of at least for probably 5 years at $255,000 a year. That's over $1 million in equipment for future year commitments. If the city pays its first year and doesn't pay forward any other year, the city has zero equipment, zero maintenance equipment. And depending on the type of lease, after 5 years, they might not own the equipment either. But they're still committed to paying $255,000 a year. This does not eliminate the goal, eliminate or reduce future taxpayer support for the golf course operations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Appreciate it. Welcome.
My name is Roger King, and I spoke to you last week about what I consider to be some great inconsistencies in this whole process. But let's put that aside and assume that the city wants to pull a switcheroo on its own RFP and get back into the business of providing golf course maintenance equipment. Ruth just basically went through the numbers, $255,000 for leasing golf equipment in the first year. I would assume that that would continue on for the remaining 4 years of the contract, which would, if my math is correct, that would amount to a total of $1,275,000 over the 5-year period. And at the end of that 5-year period, the city would own nothing. Right now, and last week, Finance Director Mr. Turback said that there's no silver bullet on the costs of equipping the golf courses. I think he's wrong. The silver bullet is this: Dakota Golf Management already owns all of that equipment and is willing to continue to use it and maintain it to take care of our golf courses. The people behind me, for the most part, are members of your customer base, golfers who pay the freight. One thing you might want to consider is that your customer base owes you nothing. As you know, there are other golf options in Sioux Falls and the surrounding area. I'm sure you've seen a lot of faces at last week's and this week's meetings that you don't see very often. I also imagine that you've received quite a bit of correspondence concerning this issue from citizens that you don't normally hear from. Again, these people are your customer base, and it seems to me that this process is going a long way toward alienating that customer base. In the past few weeks, a lot of new information has come to light. Some of that has already been discussed tonight, and I'm not going to repeat all of that. But it looks like some fuzzy math is being brought into play, and it's starting to cause some people to rethink where they might want to spend their golf dollars next year. And what if some members of your customer base decide they want to go elsewhere and operating funds fall well short of the anticipated $284,000 that Mr. Turback stated last week would be the anticipated revenues? I think it's been fairly well demonstrated over the last several weeks, and especially over the last 2, that your customer base wants you to retain Dakota Golf Management. I hope you listen to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
And again, thank you for not repeating the comments. We also appreciate that. Welcome.
Thank you. Dave Jansa. I'm reading a prepared statement for my brother Tom, who's in the hospital and unable to attend tonight's meeting.
Thanks, Dave.
Councilors, mayor, city administrators, Tom from Landscapes Unlimited, golfers, and fellow citizens, my goal in crafting this statement is to try to make it easier for you, not more difficult. Please remember, no decision process should be viewed as so sacred that it cannot be questioned. Just because the consequences of voting no on this contract might be difficult, that is not a reason to vote yes. We are here tonight because of specific decisions city administrators have undertaken over a period of time. Each one alone might not be that significant, but after a series of these decisions, we are far off the beaten path. Number one, city administrators chose to do an RFP in 2017 without even 1 year of relevant financial information available to proposers. Number two, in 2016, the city contracted with the National Golf Foundation to advise them on all things golf-related in Sioux Falls. That report states that 2020 would be the best time to get the best results from an RFP process. The National Golf Foundation recommended no major policy changes. They also agreed that the city and any proposers should have a chance to see a few years of post-renovation financial data before responding to an RFP. But city administrators ignored all this and proceeded to number three. To address the lack of relevant data, city administrators moved the RFP process later in the year than desirable. That decision resulted in almost zero leeway in trying to get a contract done by the end of this year. Number four, city administrators also ignored the National Golf Foundation's advice to resist significant policy changes. Instead, you are here tonight deciding on a contract with a major policy change. Number five, as a result of this, city administrators were unprepared for the most crucial item, equipment. This is not just important to Dakota Golf, but to all the citizens in this room and throughout Sioux Falls who have a policy change and the taxpayer investment that it is going to require. We're asking $750,000 for all our equipment. The city offered $432,000. Those are the numbers that are on the table. Since city administrators could not come to terms with me, they would need a plan B. They explained to us that $743,000 would be required year one. What they failed to reveal is that additional $255,000 maintenance equipment lease payments are required in years 2, 3, 4, and 5. When you add these payments to the $743,000 year one funding needed, you come up with $1.5 million in total expenditures. Here's the deal. $1.5 million is the real alternative to Dakota Golf's $750,000. I hope this helps shed some light on where you are tonight. You're faced with a difficult decision. City administrators have pushed you to the brink once again, demanding that you accept something you don't want or like because there's no time or no options. It's time to say no. There are always options when doing the right thing is at stake. With respect to the matter at hand, you can vote no. You can vote no to put the city back on track. Execute an RFP in 2020 that benefits all parties. You can vote no to address the fundamental unfairness of not giving the valued current contractor the first opportunity to lead the golf courses out of the Elmwood renovation that they worked so hard to bring to successful fruition. You can vote no to reject completely changing the way the city has looked at golf course operations at a time that the National Golf Foundation has recommended just the opposite. You can vote no to committing large, unnecessary expenditure of public funds. In closing, I respect the time, the thought, and the effort you have shown, and the vote you will cast. Regardless of the outcome, thank you for allowing me the privilege of working at the city courses for the past 30 years. I truly feel I did everything in my power to avoid being here tonight in this position. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. Welcome.
Chuck Corkins. I spoke to you last week. I have just a couple more comments tonight. I want to be very clear that I don't think anybody in this room is lobbying against Landscapes Unlimited. They have a resume that is quite impeccable, hard to compete with probably, except for 23 years of successful management of that golf course without one complaint, not one. Seems to be there should be a reason why you put somebody out the door after that long of tenure successfully. And again, this isn't about lobbying against Landscapes Unlimited. I have a question. Well, as far as the reason why, I have never heard a reason why Dakota Golf Management should be relieved of their management contract, other than some internal auditor said it was time to do an RFP. You've already heard about the timeliness of that several times. We don't need to talk about that anymore. I would like to know the reason. I think Tom Janza would like to know the reason. I think the people in this room would like to know the reason why Dakota Golf Management is not the chosen one any longer. Secondly, and you've heard a lot about this already, the study. I wasn't aware of that until today. But I'm wondering why the city spent the amount of money that they did, and I don't know what that figure is, to go 100% against the recommendation. My question would be, why did you do that if you weren't going to follow their recommendation? I think everybody in this room needs the answer to that. Thirdly, I've heard testimony about other testimony that's gone on, question and answers have gone on through this process. It's recently been brought to light. Well, I'm here to tell you that in the last 2 weeks, last week and tonight, you're hearing testimony from a room full of people that support Dakota Golf and Tom Janza. They do not support bringing in Landscapes Unlimited as the management firm for this golf course. Again, there's no reason to do that. Not a single person has come to this podium, not one single person has come to this podium in 2 weeks and said one reason why they agree that Dakota Golf Management should not get that contract. Not a single person. 2 nights, 2 rooms full of people, not a single person is in agreement with what the City Council has done. You're hearing testimony tonight and last week from a room full of people that you folks work for. You should think about that. You work for us. We have been here for 2 nights, last Tuesday and tonight, lobbying for Dakota Golf with not a single solitary person. I'm repeating myself. Not a single solitary person lobbying against Dakota Golf. You're speaking and you're voting for your constituents. This is your opportunity to govern for the people that you represent. Not listening to them, and they're well represented, not listening to them is one way to govern. I don't think it's the right way. And you have an opportunity tonight to vote no for a good reason, and that's because Dakota Golf Management has done nothing to not have their contract renewed. Maybe 2020 is the year. I would beg of you, before you vote tonight, to think about this room full of people that disagrees with the process and what it appears is going to happen. I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Corkins. Welcome.
Mayor Mike, councilors, Jason Reisdorfer. I'm on the Park and Rec board for Sioux Falls. I wasn't on the selection committee, but I've read a lot about a lot of this stuff, so I just have a couple comments. I emailed you all some of them tonight, and I'm not going to repeat a bunch of this, but there's just a couple things that I'd like to cover. From the RFP on page 5, it says the key goals of this process are to identify a management company or lessee that will maximize financial performance, provide great value and affordable access for citizens, and enhance these valuable community assets. Now, the first thing I see is maximize financial performance. And this RFP selection team that you heard from tonight unanimously voted 8-0 when they're looking at the contracts in front of them that this was going to solve the number one issue on the plan, which is to maximize financial performance. there's a room full of 100 or so people here that are very much in support of Dakota Golf. I think that's very compelling, but you all represent a couple 100,000 people that you need to watch out for the finance of everything, everyone, not just the people that are in this room. And you know, according to what the contract looks like, their plan is to maximize the financial performance of this thing. Dakota Golf didn't do this for free over the last few years. There was a fee in their plan too. That's not too uncommon. And you know, the part about the assets, I think is just really irrelevant when it comes to the contract. This is not about the assets. There's nothing in the contract that mentions the assets. I think it's the city's job to procure the equipment, and there's a lot of smart people in the city making the best choices for the city. And if these guys are saying that $750,000 is not the right number for this stuff, then I think we have to kind of go by what they say and trust them, because they're on the hook for this stuff. And this is just about, you know, a market pricing situation for these assets. If their plan B says that we can go out and do this thing, I think that's a viable option. I think this RFP was conducted professionally. I think it was executed correctly. And me especially, I'd like to see every single line of every single detail of the entire process, but that's not how the law is written. I think we have to trust the process, and I think we have to follow the law. And I think there's a lot of emotion here about the RFP process, and if that's what you're really mad about, then I think you need to change the law. And with that, I'm asking you to vote yes to this proposal, because if you vote no, there's no guarantee that Dakota Golf just extends this contract. This is a tricky thing. I mean, there's a lot of steps in this whole thing. So you've got a contract. You've got it unanimously approved by the selection committee. You've got it unanimously supported by the Park and Rec Board. And that's the question on the table. It's not about assets. It's about a contract right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. Craig Helms. I did speak last week, had no intention of speaking this evening until just now. If the objective was to maximize the financial results,
Mr. Helms,
why would you
focus on that.
select,
Thank you.
why would you select to pay somebody versus the two other options you had where people are paying you? You don't even have to discuss purchase of equipment. You don't have to discuss anything else. You have a guaranteed amount. If that was, I asked, and I doubt that the park board knew anything of the other options. So how are they supposed to vote for anything else? I mean, what's there to vote on? Yay or nay? Everybody says this is great. So the RFP process is great. There was two different options to select. I believe the council should make that decision. I don't understand why the city wishes to operate golf courses as opposed to receive payments. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Helms. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Kelly Plinus Nelson. I'm a citizen of Sioux Falls, a graduate of Washington High School. I've been here a long time, just like many of these people behind me. I'm excited to be able to be here in front of you. I've never participated in or ever stepped up in front of anyone before, but I think it's really important to say something. It's important to note that Tom Jansa has been basically a city employee for 23 years. A person who was born and raised in Sioux Falls, the golf coach of O'Gorman High School, successful, kind, a good citizen, taxpayer. And the thing is that if you were to just perhaps go with an RFP, and maybe this isn't a case strong enough, but I hope that in the future, when you look at future RFPs, that you might take into consideration in your matrix that a person who has lived and was born and raised in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, is going to be basically kicked to the curb and have to leave the state. I don't know if that really means anything to you, but it means a lot to me. How would you feel if someone said, I'm sorry, your business is done. You've done a wonderful job. We don't even give you a gold watch for working for the city for 23 years. That's horrible. That's really, how would you feel if that happened to you? What happens if it happened to you? I mean, we're talking about a man's life who dedicated his entire life to golf and did a wonderful job in Sioux Falls. And now you're basically kicking him to the curb, telling him, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to go out of state. And we're gonna hire somebody from some other state to do this in your place. So it may not be enough to save Tom's job, but I hope in the future, please consider in your RFP matrix that you do put something about being in South Dakota as a priority. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kelly. Folks, anybody else? Welcome.
Tom Walsh, Gray Life. First off, I appreciate all the effort that the RFP committee went to. The issue of transparency we've discussed, we won't go there, but in the RFP, it said you had to state that you're going to provide the equipment. We budgeted for $1.6 million for equipment on the golf courses. Lastly, the timing of this thing, bringing it to the last meeting before the end of the year, I think is really poor. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Welcome.
By the way, Landscapes Unlimited is an excellent company.
Thanks, Tom. Welcome.
Phil Priest. I spoke with you last week, and a comment was made during the discussion that the park budget already included the expense for additional equipment if the city decided to go ahead and buy or lease. My question is, when was a budget established that would incorporate the cost for this type of purchase? Simply because if it wasn't included originally, that means you're taking it from an operating standpoint to support the golf courses, that expenses for renewal, upgrading, improvements would be delayed. I think something's a little bit strange when you incorporate a expense for something in a contract that most people didn't know anything about without somebody in the contract procedure knowing. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you. Welcome.
Scott Harrisman, Sioux Falls. I don't golf and have never got on these golf courses ever before. But the process here does concern me a little bit because it is my tax money being used. I've had friends who've worked for Dakota Golf over the years and said that they do a very good job at what they do, and they do make the city a lot of money. That aside, I'm very glad that all these people have been here over the past couple of weeks to see how things have been running over the past 7.5 years by using a secretive process in government. And what we call I call secret ramrod. And this is what we have here. This isn't the first time this has happened, folks. We have an administration building that was decided by one person, secret ramrod. Got a swimming pool that we have to subsidize $400,000 a year, in which we used a payback of a federal levy bond to pay for the swimming pool. Does a lot of people know that? Did you know that? That we took this payback from the federal government, a levy bond, that we should have used to pay off the actual levy bond, and we used it to build a pool because we went secret ramrod. We did the same thing with the railroad yard. Secret, $27 million, $62 a square foot, got a bunch of dirty land, and the railroads still run through our town like crazy and switch their cars 4 blocks away because secrets and ramrodding. That's what this is about. I could care less about the golf part. Is a constant secrets and no transparency with this city council, and then ramrodding it through and handing it to them at the last minute and saying, you have no choice but to pull out your gigantic rubber stamp and say yes. That's what we've had for 7.5 years. And tonight, I hope you do something different, just for once. Thank you.
Folks, did anybody else want to engage the council?
Bruce Danielson, Sioux Falls. A couple of weeks ago, I was up here and I talked about a movie called The Sting. And I've been thinking about that movie a lot more as this project came along, because we brought up The Sting during the discussion on the parking ramp, and it made me start thinking about it when we were doing the admin building, and it caused this process called 3 fraud investigators to sit down over the last few days and look deeper into the contract proposal.
It's all right.
Does it bother you that I'm up here and I'm talking and trying to bring it up? At least I'm not doing one-finger salutes this week. This RFP process is becoming a classic amateur bait and switch operation. The RFP process asked for something basic, and we are now seeing something convoluted designed to confuse. The classic strategy for bait and switch fraud, such as this one appears to be, is to request to buy a certain number of apples. The insider lowballs the price on apples, and then on the basis of the bid price on apples is given the bid. Then the buyer elects to buy fewer apples and some oranges at a high price, high enough to make up for their lowball price on apples, thereby ensuring the insider bidder gets selected, and a lucrative profit is by overpricing the oranges that no one got a chance to bid on. How does this bid look anything like what was originally asked for? Bait and switch, by the way, is a federal crime. Look at this audience out here. I'm so amazingly impressed that these people all showed up here. We have worked hard to get the public to come and see what goes on in this chamber. I've put up 3,100 videos over the last few years showing what happens in this room and in other events around the city. These people are energized. They are voters, and I hope that they go to the polls this year and remember everybody who voted for this contract. There's no guarantees from Landscapes Unlimited, only as of yet a promise to do something. Thank you.
Folks, did anybody else want to engage the council? Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Thor Barden. Thank you very much for your time. First thing, I also want to echo that I'm very appreciative of the RFP process and the time that was taken to put into that. One of the things that I just wanted to point out, is voting for this, voting against this, that's ultimately your decision. And, I have a lot of respect for that, and I'm glad that you chose to take more time to actually investigate and, do the proper research to hopefully find a resolution this evening. One of the things I also wanted to bring up, though, is that much like the election process, when we step in and we vote for something, each one of us is one voice. Whether it's somebody out here in the most packed I've ever seen this room to this date, or it's somebody up here in front of me, we're still one voice. And so ultimately what we've charged you with as these many voices is to please make sure that you are listening to us. We understand. You have a lot more information that we haven't seen before. We understand that, you're doing your best, that you're trying to communicate with us and make sure that you're doing the right decisions on behalf of the Sioux Falls. And that's great. And so if you're absolutely saying, you know what, yes, we like Landscapes Unlimited, great, let's do it, and let's make sure that we're telling the public, here's the reason why I did it. If you are saying, hey, no, I don't think so, I absolutely agree with everybody that's come up to us, then say, no, I don't agree with it, and here's the reasons why, because the public told me, or because I don't agree with this specific person. It's about being that one voice, but then also about being that one voice for everybody that's spoken to you and working for them. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Thor. Appreciate it. Welcome. Folks, if there's anybody else who wants to speak, if you just come up to the front, we'd appreciate it. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Huther and City Council leaders. I've really appreciated all the...
Ma'am, your name, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Phyllis Arns.
Thank you, Phyllis.
appreciated all the comments here tonight, and I want to follow up on the lady who talked about the background of Tom Jansa and his ties to the city. And what I've heard for a long time is our city leaders saying, buy local, support your local business leaders. And now we're wanting to toss out a local business leader and bring in someone from out of state who undoubtedly is going to take a lot of that money back out of state. And so I encourage you to buy local and support our local businesses.
Phyllis, thank you very much. Tom, you've already had an opportunity to speak. Sorry, sir. Thank you.
I would like to, point of order, I'd like to ask him, I guess we can.
Yeah, well, when it comes to the time for the council, you can certainly do whatever you want to do there, Councilor Staley. Folks, anybody else want to engage the council? Councilors?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Thank you, Councilor.
The first person, or one of the first people that spoke, we heard a lot about legal opinion and questions, and so I don't know if Tracy or Mr. Greenfield are here that would be able to come and address the slides that were presented and your perspective on some of this as well.
Tracy, welcome.
And I know you had an opportunity to stand up and speak and didn't, but I'm asking for some clarity.
I'm Greg, excuse me, I'm Greg Greenfield. The mayor gave me his cold that he had last week. I think that there is a risk that if, first of all, this process has resulted in somebody that has been deemed qualified and selected. Not only are they qualified and selected, but after that happened, then we went further and we negotiated a contract with that person. And that contract's in front of you right now. As to what you can or can't do, I don't know if that was one of your concerns. I guess you can or can't do what you will with this contract, but I'm going to tell you that if you reject this contract, I still haven't heard any testimony what's wrong with the contract or what's wrong with landscapes. If you reject this contract, I think that you run a substantial risk that the person, the contract that you awarded it to, having gone this far in the process and having spent money and relied on and doing all things in good faith, that there is a risk that they're not going to be overly happy with that. On the other hand, if you're asking me, well, what about this other lawsuit that's out there? I'm not convinced by the case that was cited on the low bid statutes. The low bid statutes, that's an old case. It was from 1989. The cases, the RFP process wasn't even approved until 2010. The RFP is a different process than a low bid process. You're not just looking at price, you're also looking at total overall quality. If you're asking me whether or not I think that there was some nefarious activities or whether or not there was some economic gain that was that a certain party unidentified yet gained, I'll tell you no. I don't think that Dakota Golf's perceived loss of a substantial economic benefit equates with somebody's gain of an economic benefit. I don't know if you're following me, but their loss of an economic benefit doesn't mean somebody else gained. Tracy's going to address that exactly. I think that one of the pieces of information that you received from one of the Parks members, Tom Jansa himself, when he testified before the Parks Board, said we were all under the same understanding, and Tracy's going to address that right now. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Tracy?
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Counselor. First, there have been a lot of comments made about the RFP process and a lot of criticisms of the process, and I'd like to make just a couple comments in general about the RFP process. It is a time-tested process and has proven to work successfully for the city many times in the past. Many of you have been involved in RFPs and reviewing and approving contracts that result from the RFPs. Competing proposals are scored and selected based on relevant competitive criteria, all of which are laid out in advance and shared with everyone at the outset of the process. So everyone knows going in, any company that's interested in competing knows what the rules are, knows what the criteria are at the outset. The process is based upon fair competition that takes place in an objective environment that's free from unfair or irrelevant influences, political or otherwise, for the purpose of reaching a decision that is in the collective judgment of all of the involved in the process that is in the best interest of the city as a whole, not in any one particular party. The process is conducted in a very professional manner. I've been through many of them. They've always been done in a very professional manner. The process is legal. It protects the taxpayers and the city residents, and if followed, the process will protect the city from legal challenges. Now, I do want to address some of the specifics that were mentioned earlier on in some of the comments in terms of criticisms that the RFP was somehow changed, the rules of the game changed, or was somehow misleading or confusing. And it's going to take me a minute to get through this, so bear with me. But I think at the end, the proof will be in the pudding, and trust me, I'll get to the pudding at the end. The terminology is very important, and we've heard comments that clearly are confusing the two possible structures that were allowed for under the RFP. The RFP clearly indicated that proposers have the option of submitting a proposal reflective of A, an operating lease approach, or B, a full service management agreement approach. So there were two different alternatives. They can propose to enter into a lease with the city, or they can propose to enter into a full service management agreement. And some of the rules are different, the advantages are different, and I'm going to go through some of those with you now. A lease, and this comes from the National Golf Foundation. They summarize actually 6 different structures, operating structures for municipal golf courses. We allowed for 2 possible structures within the RFP, a lease and a full service management contract. And the National Golf Foundation, and I'll summarize this, but it says an operating lease. Municipal golf courses are often leased to a private company who would be responsible for all operating expenses as well as some or all capital needs. That's a lease. Leases are typically structured to provide an annual lease payment to the city. So these are valuable city assets. We put them out for lease, basically turn them over to a private company to operate. In return, they pay the city a lease payment each year. The advantage of this structure is the removal of the municipality from the day-to-day operation and shifting the risk to the operator. So somebody mentioned earlier, why didn't the city do that? That would certainly be a risk-free approach, and that's very, very true. But this wasn't strictly a financial decision. There were many criteria in selecting the best overall proposal. The proposed operations and business plan, operating experience. We want to turn it over to somebody that has experience in running golf courses. If it was simply whoever was going to offer us the highest amount, who knows what would happen to the city's assets. The financial capability and reporting and accountability of the firm. The capital improvement plan and the firm references, as well as the fee offer or management fee. The key disadvantage is the loss of control in the operation, and that's something that was perceived to be very important on the part of the city, upon the part of the Parks Department, the Park Board, and the committee that reviewed the proposals. Are we willing to give up complete control over the city's assets, the golf courses? Do we care if the public has access to those golf courses? Those are the kinds of questions and concerns that would tend to favor an operating full-service operating agreement as opposed to a lease. Now let me explain to you a little bit about what a full-service management contract is. That's the second alternative that was allowed for under the RFP. Under a full-service management contract, the management company is hired typically to operate all aspects of the golf facility. That's exactly what we're proposing with Landscapes Unlimited. The greatest advantage to a municipality is having a qualified third party who will control the operation and employ all staff directly. This can lead to a reduction in expense over self-operation as well as improvement in operations due to the marketing and management expertise of the operator and economies of scale in areas such as purchasing. You've heard a lot of that stuff over the last few weeks. The greatest disadvantage of this option is that the operational risk remains with the municipality, which also continues to be responsible for capital improvements. In the case of a full-service management contract, the agreement will create an alignment of interests so that if the management company is doing well, the municipality will do well in turn. And that's really the motivation, speaking strictly for myself, the motivation that really put the management contract out ahead of a lease. We're very optimistic about the potential for our golf courses. We think there's a lot of future upside to the city operating the golf courses in a profitable manner. If we enter into a lease, we forego all that potential revenue to the city in the future for a guaranteed payment. I believe in certainly the proposal that the successful firm, Landscapes Management Company, proposed indicates that the courses do indeed have the potential, strong potential to operate in the black. The first year they won't. It's going to cost us money to get into this new arrangement. The second year, they're projecting about a break-even year. But after that, the trend goes up strongly, and we will soon be making more cash on the bottom line than what we would otherwise be making, considerably more. So those are the two alternatives under the RFP. A couple things, other things I'll mention just to kind of rebut some of the concerns about the process and whether or not the RFP was misleading. The comment about the goal to eliminate or reduce future taxpayer support for golf courses, that was one of 10 goals listed in the RFP. The goal clearly conveys the idea that the city may have to provide financial support for the golf courses going forward. We didn't say that eliminating financial support was an absolute necessity. Eliminate or reduce. The performance expectations indicate the successful proposer will be required to procure all goods and services necessary for the operation of the facilities. And we could argue Black's Law Dictionary definitions of what the word procure means, but the performance expectations clearly indicated that under a lease, and I'm quoting, under a lease, all operating and capital costs, including equipment costs, will be the responsibility of the lessee, in other words, the company. So there should be no debate at all about what the arrangement would have been if we were here proposing a lease, but we're not. We're proposing a management contract, a full-service management contract. That same section goes on in the very next sentence to say, under a management contract arrangement, the city shall have the right to approve the annual budget as well as any proposed capital equipment expenditures for the golf course and capital equipment prior to implementation by the management company. If the city's intention under a management contract arrangement, which is what LMC's proposed contract is, was to make the company responsible for all operating and capital costs, including equipment, as clearly stated in relation to a lease, why wouldn't the RFP have included a similar statement in relation to a management contract? It didn't, because that's not how the management contract was intended to work. Now let me walk you through the proof in the pudding, so to speak. The assertion that there is confusion or misunderstanding or the rules were changed as it relates to the city's participation in the costs and the question of whether or not the RFP made it clear that the cost would not be the responsibility of the management company. It's certainly absolutely clear in my mind, but that's because I understand how the city's other management contracts work and management contracts in general, and I understand what the city's intent was. But was there confusion on the part of the companies who proposed a management contract? Those are the people we ought to be really truly concerned about. Were they confused when they submitted their proposals? Clearly, the folks that submitted for a lease were not confused. The proposals that we received on a management contract option, there were several, including Landscapes Management Company. In the case of Landscapes Management, the amount of the fees they're projected to earn over the 5-year term amount to far less than what it would cost to provide equipment over that time. In other words, Landscapes won't generate enough fee revenue for their company to cover the cost of providing equipment, if that was a requirement, much less ever make a profit. Any company that followed that kind of a business model would quickly go broke. So it's complete nonsense to suggest that when Landscape submitted their proposal, they did so with the understanding that they would be responsible for the cost of the equipment. But what about the other firms? What about the others that proposed a full-service management agreement? Were they confused? Did they submit their proposal with the understanding that the company, that they would be responsible for the cost of the equipment? While I can't disclose publicly what each of the other firms proposed for fees, I can say that Landscape's fee proposal was not an outlier. The fees proposed by the other firms were of the same order of magnitude, and even the very highest management fee proposed among all those firms that proposed a full-service management contract would have left that company far short of covering the cost of providing equipment and nowhere near making a profit. The point is that none of the firms that submitted a management contract proposal did so with the understanding that the cost of providing the equipment would be their responsibility. None of the management fees proposed would have been high enough to cover that cost. And it would be nonsense to think that any of these companies was proposing to lose money on this deal. If all these firms understood this to be the case, as evidenced by the amount of their proposed fees, the RFP was certainly clear enough on that point and was not misleading to the responding companies. So that's the proof in the pudding. The companies that proposed understood what they were getting into, understood what they were proposing, or their fees would have been much, much higher if they had to cover the cost of equipment. So I think that's nothing but a red herring to say that the rules were changed or it was misleading in the RFP or somehow one of the proposers gained a competitive advantage over the others. So with that, I'll consider your answer, your question responded to.
Thank you. And, you know, it did answer my question in regards to our owning our own equipment or not in far more detail. And so I appreciate the answer to that, understanding really the differences behind this. So thank you for that. I have additional questions, but I'll yield my time for now.
Thank you very much. I do have a prepared statement, but I just want to respond to a couple things that I've heard. The first thing is an RFP is not a suicide pact. If we had no choice and we always just have to take the recommendation, then why are we here? Then we're superfluous. This isn't about, for me, it's not about an equipment negotiation. It's not about a certain person. It's not about emotion. It's not about local, and it's not about a full room. So with that, my prepared statement. Sometimes in life there are no good options, but you have to play the cards that you're dealt, and that's where I'm at right now. This isn't about Landscape. It isn't about Dakota Golf Management. I'm sure Landscape would do a great job. Their resume speaks for itself. They're incredible. I'm sorry they're caught in the middle of this. It's unfortunate. Dakota Golf has done a great job managing the courses and served us well. This isn't even about the RFP process in general. It works. I know it does. I've been on 2 of them. We should trust the process, usually. But that doesn't mean we must always accept the result or that we have to approve. Otherwise, why are we here? In this specific case, my concerns are about this process, the timing, the methodology of the RFP, the major policy choice of management versus lease being made for us, the financial implications for the taxpayer, and the contract terms. Why did we do an RFP at all? Why did we do it now just as the Elmwood renovations were being concluded rather than waiting as the NGF report suggests? Why did we not explore a lease option more fully? Why would we choose a management agreement when we had at least 2 lease options on the table? We were paying a management fee so that we can likely lose money, take the risk, and buy capital equipment when we hadn't needed to prior to the renovations. Why are we subjecting the taxpayer to likely years of operating losses, significant capital equipment investments, and large capital improvement costs? Why are we doing this when we had options that would have transferred the risk and the cost? Why are we doing this at the same time we are cutting budgets in the Parks Department in light of slowing sales tax revenue growth? Why are we obligating ourselves to buy and lease hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of capital equipment over the next 5 years when our current vendor already has it or a lease proposer would have supplied it? Why are we transferring $325,000 from the 2017 Parks operating budget, which, by the way, would expire and go back to the general fund on December 31st, and we're going to encumber it somehow and transfer it into the operating account for the golf management company to buy equipment in 2018? Why are we proposing to pay a management company $75,000 a year when we had 2 companies, including our current vendor, willing to pay us? Why was the major policy decision to go to a management arrangement rather than a lease, and change made by a committee of 5 with only 1 city councilor with no input from the policy-making body, this city council? Why are we here now at the last minute with no plan B? I always remind myself that there may be additional information that will make it all make sense. Right now, I don't have that luxury of time, unfortunately. I have to make a decision based on the information I have. I have issues with the contract. However, I'm told I can't amend it. If I do it, it isn't valid because the other side has to review and sign it again. So I'm faced with a take it or leave it proposition. So be it. How do I vote for a contract with a blank page that represents the equipment we'll have to buy or lease? How does this proposal meet the stated goal in the RFP to reduce or eliminate city funding? I understand it's not just about money, but let's face it, it's a big deal. When our current operator would have paid us for the honor to run the courses, paid for the equipment, taken the risk, and has a proven track record, why are we doing this? I've been told I need to make my decision based on the contract, so I will. The contract takes the council out of the capital equipment approval process. You can minimize it, say it's about lawnmowers, but it's bigger than that. One of our few powers is the power of the purse. We're told we can see the budget before the city approves it, or we can see monthly reports, or we can do an audit. That's fine, but how does that give us authority over the spending? How much spending on equipment can go on without approval or oversight? Hundreds of thousands, millions? This is a precedent. Don't fool yourself. It's not just about golf. So I've expressed my concern. I've debated this. I've challenged it, but no one wants to change it. So I'm forced into a corner. This is not about micromanaging the operator. This isn't day-to-day meddling. We approve these with all of our management contracts. We approve snowcat groomers at Great Bear. We approve projectors at the pavilion. Why not here? I full well understand the consequences of my vote. I accept it and would say we were put in this position. I believe the best way forward is to undo this entire process and start over. So to that end, in the best interest of the city, I am going to move to cancel the RFP.
Second.
There's been a motion.
Substitute motion.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Councilor. There's been a motion. There's been a motion to cancel the RFP by Councilor Neitzer, seconded by Councilor Staley. Any discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor Starr.
I guess I would defer if Councilor Staley.
Councilor Staley.
You go
As a
first.
second.
Councilor
Thank you.
Starr.
If I could, I'd like to ask a question of Attorney Simons, if I could, and her background with the slides she shared, if that's okay.
Sure.
I fortunately and unfortunately have been on both sides of the courtroom with you, and I appreciate one very much, so the other not as much. But I think many in the room tonight don't know your background and where you brought your legal opinion from. So if you would share how much time you spent at Woods and advising the school board, and I don't need the whole resume, but enough so that we can understand where your legal opinion came from that you shared with us earlier.
Thank you. I've been practicing law for 31 years. I spent 23 years at Davenport, Evans, Hurwitz, and Smith. I left there in 2010 in order to do public service when I was offered the opportunity to become the assistant superintendent of the Sioux Falls School District and act as their inside local counsel, which I did for 5 years. So I have had governmental experience in assisting the Sioux Falls School Board when they had their legal issues. I am semi-retired and I currently work for a local company part-time.
Perfect, thank you. I just wanted to maybe follow up where we were earlier and where your legal opinion did come from. Was there anything else now that I got you here?
Councilor, did you have a question of?
Nope, I'm done. That'll work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Staley?
Well, first of all, I wanted to repeat what I said last week, that I am so grateful to have so many people here. I'm grateful for the people who emailed us, the people who called us, whether you supported this decision or you did not. That is what makes our city a great place to be, because we all have input and we have to be responsive to listening to that. I have talked about this RFP process many times. I think it's problematic, and I think the way we're using it in our city is problematic. We have a budget within our city council. We have budgeted money for private legal counsel, and I think this would have been and this could be a great time to use that, because we're getting the administration's legal team, the people who are involved with the contract, telling us things. I think we need to hear another viewpoint. And as we've heard from an attorney already for public testimony, there's more than one way of looking at an issue. That's why we have trials, of course. But with the RFP situation, just simply put, I tell citizens, this is what we're dealing with this golf course thing. We did have a secret committee. And I don't mean that disrespectfully to the people participating, but I didn't know who was on it. I didn't know how they chose the 2 citizen golfers to be on it, but somehow they came together. And we're looking at the proposals, and the proposals that I never get to see. So the question that people are saying is, well, Teresa, what's wrong with Dakota Golf? Why are we not using them anymore? I can't tell them that. Again, it's just trust us. This is the best company here. We've looked at all the proposals. You don't get to see them, but trust us. This is the best way to go. And I'm very uncomfortable with this. I don't think we've had enough information to go forward with anything. And then to have the implications coming at us, the nuances this week, that if we don't approve this thing, there's going to be some kind of a lawsuit. I mean, that is like absurd. How are we doing business in this community? Again, I had nothing to do with the negotiating the contract. I didn't get to see the proposals. And then this thing is just thrust upon us, and we're supposed to just embrace it. I'm not going to do business that way in Sioux Falls. And I don't think the people I talk with want it done that way either. So however this plays out, I just want the people to understand how this was. It's really a simple thing. And we want to do what's best for our community, and that's all I have to say.
Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Welcome.
I'm sorry to hear Tom is hospitalized, by the way. I don't know what's up, but I think I speak for all of us when we wish him the best. So, anyway, I'm going to try not to repeat myself as well. I did make a couple notes to address some of the questions I've continued to receive via email, calls, and texts over the past week, and I think I've got a couple points that we'll touch on what Councilor Neitsert's brought up. And I kind of kept asking myself throughout the week, I mean, how did we get to this point? Why are we here for this special holiday get-together this week? Is it all about the company that was selected? I think in the couple hundred emails I've received on the subject, I can probably count on one hand how many actual objections to the company that I saw. And I think maybe last week we spent all of about 2 minutes talking about the company in question that was offered the contract. Are we here because we have genuine concerns with the company and the process, or because negotiations were broken off for the value of equipment? If the city would have just agreed to pay the $750,000, would we be here tonight? In an open letter to Sioux Falls golfers on October 18th, after the committee made its selection, Mr. Jans himself stated that in a letter that Landscapes Unlimited is a world-class golf management and construction company, and we are confident that they will do an excellent job in their new role managing the city's courses. We will be focused on working with them to ensure the smoothest possible transition for the city and its golfers. So all seemed fine, and again, the committee, I know they had every intention to keep Dakota Golf involved, hopefully keeping their positions with them. And I've spoken with them recently, and they still would like to do that with whoever would like to retain their job. So, but anyways, things seemed to be fine and on a pretty good pace until equipment negotiations were abruptly broken off. As far as the RFP program, you know, it's designed to be an organized, logical, meticulous program that gives you a system to evaluate all bidding companies based on qualifications and merit, while keeping things like personal relationships and emotion to a minimum. And I mean through literally hours, as I've said before, hours and hours of evaluations, studying, and interviews that lead you to a fact-based conclusion for each company interviewed. In my experience, I found it to be effective in that regard, and I know each of the committee members, they work their hind ends off following the program and giving the same consideration to each company. I take some issue in the notion that's been floated that rules and timelines were changed for some, or this committee was led blindly by the administration. Speaking for myself, anyone who looks at my voting record will see that I've been on the opposite side of this administration on a number of issues, as I'm sure as the mayor can attest. And those who know me well know that being told what to do isn't one of my strong suits either. I'm sure my wife would attest and need more than 5 minutes of public input to discuss that topic. If the RFP process is the issue, let's have that discussion separately and at another time. As of today, those are the rules we agreed to play by when all this started. Do we now set a precedent of just tossing it aside because some don't like the conclusions? This reminds me of the presidential election. The losing side last year again came up, well, why is the Electoral College so important? Well, there's a long story if you go to our country's history. The short answer is those were the rules you played by when you signed up for the election. Everybody was clearly knew what the guidelines were and you lost. Just because it didn't turn out the way we wanted, do we just let's start again? I don't know. It seems a little dangerous to me. Tonight, I would simply say I encourage a yes or no vote based on Landscape Unlimited's qualifications. And if the no votes went out based on those qualifications, then let's move on to the next step in the process. Thank you.
Councilor Chircone.
Thank you. Well, first of all, there's been a number of points that have been raised here, and let me address at least 4 of them. And Councilor Silberg, I think, addressed the RFP process, but I'd just like to expand on that again a little bit. The RFP process is a logical, orderly way to select, in this case, the best company for the job. It removes bias and emotion from the equation, allowing for an objective decision. As much as we like the people we have done business with in the past as well as in the future, and let me tell you that all 3 Toms involved in these proposals are good guys. This isn't about the good guys. We have a responsibility to make an objective decision on facts and not on who we know or the emotion that surrounds the issue. And believe me, this is an emotional issue. In this case, the RFP selection group was unanimous in their selection of Landscapes Management Company. I believe LMC is more than capable in their delivery, in their ability to honor the terms of this contract and will offer the best experience to the golfing public. Regarding out-of-state selection or selection of an out-of-state company to manage one of our courses, first of all, we cannot discriminate based on location. Nor should we, after all. We are interested in determining who can best serve the needs of Sioux Falls. That's what this process was about. Who is in the best position to provide the service to the citizens of Sioux Falls? LMC was good enough to design Prairie Green Golf Course. They were good enough to complete the redesign of Elmwood Golf Course. I do not recall concern about their abilities to complete either of these projects at the time. Again, we are tasked with making the best selection that we possibly can. Much has been said about equipment. Number one, I was surprised to learn that the city of Sioux Falls did not own the equipment previously. Owning the equipment now and into the future will resolve the issue we're currently dealing with. I had hoped that Dakota Golf would accept the proposal of having the equipment, their equipment, independently appraised, and a deal mutually agreeable and mutually fair to all could have been reached. Maybe that's still possible. I'm not sure. But this agenda item is not about equipment. It's about who can best serve the needs of the city. And once again, I believe LMC is the company that can lead us forward. Regarding the timing, would it have been nice to be dealing with this earlier than we are now?
the last week of December? Absolutely. Should the process have been started earlier? Hindsight's usually 20/20. In this case, it tells us it probably should have been started earlier. But for whatever the reason, we are dealing with this now, and we must move forward with a decision, whether you're in favor of this agenda item or not in favor. You can vote yes, you can vote no. Dakota Golf has known for the past years that their contract ends at the end of this month. That has been no secret. That was a known from the time this current contract was signed. They've also known that there was not an option to renew this contract. They've also known that for years now that the contract would go out on an RFP, and it did. This has not been about past performance, but it's about delivering a good product moving forward. This choice in the RFP process, again, was not based on past performance. It's based on who can deliver the best in the future. So we are now at that point and need to move forward with making an objective, unbiased decision. I encourage my colleagues to vote no on the substitute motion made by Councilor Neitzer, and I would encourage my colleagues to support this contract with LMC.
Councilor Rolfing.
My few comments are going to be very short, but I wanted to talk about a couple of things. I try to do, as I said when I started this gig, as the mayor likes to say, in politics, that what I was going to do is vote for what was right and correct for the city of Sioux Falls. Not necessarily, and this is what makes this really tough, what a room full of people may think they want me to do. This is a tough one, guys, for all of us, regardless of what side we fall on. It's a tough one for all of us, believe it. All the Toms are friends of mine, and it just makes it really hard. But it comes down to the system in my book. If you want to change the system, the RFP system, which has really worked pretty well for a number of years, in fact, has reasons why the names of the people are not let out to the general public, et cetera, et cetera. Don't shoot down a system that has worked well for us for so many years. If you want to change the system, go get the system changed. Go get the process changed to make it either fair or whatever you think it should be. Go do that. That's the important thing. I got to tell you, I think Sioux Falls' reputation is on the line here a little bit. Do the people in the business who are going to do business with us in the future through the RFP program trust what's going to happen? And when they win, that they win? That's what I'm saying. Our reputation is here also. As much as I'd love to have, both of them, both Dakota Golf and Landscapes Unlimited, come in and join up or whatever, that would be a great thing, but we can't do it. We got to choose. And it falls upon the 8 of us or the 9 of us, and we're going to have to make a decision. And so that's where I'm coming from. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Urbanbach.
Thank you. I also wanted to thank everyone who's here this evening and everyone who's contacted us on both sides of this issue. I realize that having the number of people in the room it's been very powerful for all of us. But I also want you to understand, and I think I said this last week, that public input happens more than just here. It happens on email and by text. It happens in the grocery store. It happens in my workplace. So I want you to understand that we do represent the entire community when we do these votes. The other thing that I would just remind our team that I would encourage my colleagues is to also vote down the substitute motion. I think we need to stand on the resolution as it's presented. We need to make the hard decision tonight, and it is up to this group to do that. So I'd encourage you to vote no on the substitute motion.
Councilor Staley.
I just wanted to address what Councilor Rolfing said about this RFP process. And I made this statement last week, but I spent several hours calling Aberdeen, Watertown, Yankton, and Rapid City and talked with their city attorneys. I talked with mayors. And I actually told them the scenario of our golf course situation. And I told them how this RFP thing is being handled. I said, would you let your elected officials see the proposals? And they all said yes. They said, we have the RFP selection committees, and we, for the most part, we trust what's going on, but if anyone ever wants to see behind the scenes, we allow them to do that. So I asked our city attorney, Karen Leonard, I sent her an email, which she has not responded to, but what I'm asking is, are they breaking state law? Or are we, can we do this here? And that's why, again, I think we need to have some outside legal counsel helping us to understand what our rights are as city council members here when it comes to seeing all the information so we can know that we're making the best selection. Maybe this is the best selection. I can't really say for sure because I haven't seen the other choices, the other ratings. And we could redact and white out the names of the proprietary information. We're hearing things that people won't want to do business with Sioux Falls anymore if they know that we're going to be viewing their proposals behind closed doors if necessary. But I think businesses like to do business here. I don't think that we're going to just crumble up and blow away if we do that. But I'm just trying to point out that there is, I think, more flexibility in this whole process than we're being told. So, I would ask my colleagues to support Councilor Neisert's motion.
Council Vice Chair Erickson.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to make a few comments. I know I had questions before and deferred my time. I am appreciative for the last week that we had. I certainly sat down and learned a lot. I'm so appreciative for all the comments and emails that you've all sent and the people that are not here that have sent those and contacted us in many different ways. One of the things that I started looking at was the timeline, to be able to justify what does this timeline look like for us. And so I pulled the audit report from our internal audit department. And for those of you that doesn't know what that is, we have an independent department to help the city achieve the highest efficiency, effectiveness with integrity, to be highly respected service division and a catalyst for positive change. They go on to list some other functions that they do. They have an audit committee in which they report to as well. And so pulling that, back in 2008, there were some recommendations made when an audit was done of our golf management company. We recommend that a request for proposal be prepared, advertised near the end of the current agreement to determine if there are any interested management companies beside Dakota Golf Management willing to perform the service to the city. That was done in 2008. We started talking about this process in 2008. This is not a secret of when we started the process. That was not done. At that time, it says, this could be taken into consideration during the next option to renew based on performance of the Dakota Golf Management. We are not aware of any contracts by other parties inquiring or requesting to submit a proposal to manage the courses. Okay, 2008. So 2014 comes along and they do an audit report. Again, this was in December of 2014. The agreement was amended December 29th, 2014 to extend the management contract for 2 additional years until December 31st, 2017, at which time the city plans to put the contract out for RFP, requests for proposals. This amendment was executed to address the current renovations being performed at Elmwood Golf Course and the resulting changes in revenue sharing. So that was done in 2014, then pushing it back yet again. In April of 2017, there was an email sent from Director Kearney, I believe it was, stating the intentions of the RFP. All the while, all these things were also communicated with Dakota Golf. I'm not sure how we have gotten to the point of Dakota Golf or landscape. I'm not sure how we got here because that's not the RFP process. The RFP process comes in and does a scoring of maybe financials on one RFP is way higher than something else. Maybe it's not. Each one has a scoring mechanism that is all kept and weighted based on whatever it is identified, which is made to the public and is listed on our city website. I know that was read last week by Councilor Selberg. And so I'm a little confused how we got here. Last week we sat here and heard a bevy of testimony, all very good, all very emotional. I know this has been really hard on all of us as well as the public. It is emotional, and I certainly am sensitive to that. But not one of us talked about landscapes. Not one of us talked about their qualifications. Not one of us talked about who this company is that won unanimously 2 times, and that was recommended. And so that's where I'm not sure. Where I did have some questions and where I think that we can learn some lessons is not dumping a contract at 5 o'clock on our laps. Not waiting till the end of the year. All things I've communicated privately, and I'll say it again here tonight. Very frustrating for us to have to read a 100-page report over the weekend. I know what I signed up for. I'm not complaining at all. However, if you want us to make the decisions with the most time in mind, we've got to do a better job at that. We just have got to do a better job. If there's changes that need to be made in the RFP process, we need to look at doing that. We need to see how we can make that process better. But the last time I checked, when you start a ball game, you don't change in the beginning, in the middle of a game. You don't change the rules in there. Sure, you can vote to stop the RFP. You can do that. I wouldn't suggest it. That's an option we have today. And at no time has anyone told me I have to vote for this contract. No one has told me that. I have the ability to make that decision for what I think is best for the whole city. It is emotional. I'm very thankful and grateful for you all being here. I'm confused at the email that I received on October 18th from Mr. Janza, conceding and congratulating Landscapes, saying what a great job they're going to do, and we're so excited, we can't wait to work. Where that broke down, I'm not quite sure either. It's somewhere along the lines of negotiating for equipment. And I know that's not our job about the equipment to negotiate that. That has to be done on good faith. The idea that this was given to the company and said, hey, let's find some independent folks. Let's give the appraisal. If you don't like my number and I don't like your number, we each get to pick somebody and go from there. That was off the table right away. And for that, I'm a little bit frustrated as well, is let's get a third party to look at that equipment and evaluate it. What is it worth? What can we do with it? So I'm grateful for that. I'm sorry I'm going over my time. I've got one more thing I want to say. The other issue that I struggled with part of this contract was the council oversight. I ran into city employees at the grocery store and said, I'm going to email you back, don't worry, I've got some ideas what we can do. And so what I'm talking about is the relationship between the council, Landscapes, the city, our internal auditors, and those other audit mechanisms we have and safeguards. This next contract is stronger, has more oversight, maybe not 100% to my liking. However, I do have a firm verbal commitment and written commitment from Finance as well as Parks Department that they will continue to have that oversight, continue to have the internal auditor come in on an annual basis if that's what the audit chair sees fit, and have that oversight and accountability to this city council as well as the community. And there's some additional changes possibly coming that we'll look at, not to talk about today, because at the end of the day today we are talking about, is Landscapes the best for this golf contract? So I ask you to vote against the substitute motion at this time. Thank you.
Council, I'm going to ask for us to vote on the substitute motion, and then we'll continue the dialogue if there's additional dialogue. I think that's fair, and I think it's prudent. So there was a motion made by Councilor Neitzert, and I think it was seconded by
Councilor Staley.
By Councilor Staley. And if you could just read that substitute motion.
It was a motion to cancel the RFP.
A motion to cancel the RFP. So a roll call vote on the motion to cancel the RFP.
Council members Erickson,
No.
Erpenbach,
No.
Kylie,
No.
Neitzert,
Yes.
Rolfing,
No.
Selberg,
No.
Starr,
Yes.
Staley.
Yes.
That has failed 3-5. Councilor Staley?
I was just going to ask Mr. Walsh, did you still want to come up and say something?
Just one question. Is there an out should the contract not perform as you hope? Can you end it if it doesn't hit the goals?
Thank you, Tom. Councilor Erpenbach?
Could I ask Attorney Leonard to remind us what that might be in terms of if there were an issue with the way the contractor is performing, does the city have an out, or are we stuck for 5 years?
Thank you, Councilor Erpenbach and Mr. Walsh. The contract does have a termination provision in it. There is an opportunity to cure, and if landscape does not cure the breach within 30 days, then we do have termination rights. I would also refer to our outside counsel, Greg Greenfield, who drafted the contract, if you want anything expounded on.
Thank you.
Councilor Starr?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome.
I think the question tonight seems to be, how did we get here? We got here by not listening to these people. The RFP process is not inherently bad. They worked very hard with the parameters that were given to them. The problem with the RFP process in this case is the beginning part, the scope of work. And yes, Mr. Rust, I was listening the night or the afternoon that you did the presentation for us. It's the direction and policy decisions that we made or didn't make to give to the RFP committee. They sat down with a set of rules and a set of guidelines, and they went through that process. We didn't talk to the Parks Board about what they wanted to see, whether it's a management agreement or a lease agreement. They didn't have discussions about that. We didn't have discussions about that policy moving forward. We didn't even look at the National Golf Foundation report and the recommendations they made. I sat here back in August and I asked Director Kearney about where we were going. And the response I got was, well, we'll see what we get when the proposals come in. Well, how do we set policy for our city? And the bottom line, what we're trying to do is, and what I'm trying to do, is protect public access to our golf courses, to keep them affordable for the playing public. There was a great email that we all got this afternoon that talked really distinctly about how Prairie Green got expanded and Mayor White and that whole process that really struck home for me. But the bottom line is, if we don't give the public an opportunity to be part of this process, whether it's at the Parks Board level, whether it's here for a second night, that's why we're here tonight. We're not here because we're arguing about the course and things. But we're not listening. We're not listening to what our constituents are telling us. And that's why I'm going to vote against this. I'm going to go with what the consultant, National Golf Foundation, talked to us about in 2020. And again, if Director Turbeck would have been here with that explanation back in June before we started this process that he went with us tonight, talking about the differences between a management agreement and a lease agreement, we'd have been in a whole different spot tonight. Again, we wouldn't be here because we would have been read into the process when it began. It was probably the best explanation since I've been on the council for Director Turbeck to tell us exactly where we're headed and where we need to go. But we needed that back at the time when we were doing the scope of work, not when we've already negotiated a contract and gotten to this point where, you know, we've taken a good company with several good companies and not knowing the process and not knowing what happened. But the bottom line is, we got to work on the scope of work process and being read into that so we understand the process before the process starts, so we don't get to the end and complain that we weren't included in the process and these folks weren't included. And it becomes more rational. And again, I really believe the people who served on the RFP committee followed exactly what they were supposed to do. They followed the guidelines that they were given, and they did what they were supposed to do. We just didn't get to weigh in on the front end before they got to that criteria, and we're barely weighing in on the back end on the contract. So, thank you.
Council, the resolution is a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a golf course management agreement between the City of Sioux Falls and Landscape Management Company, LLC. A roll call vote, please.
Council members Erickson.
Excuse me, Counselor Neitzer wanted to say something. He had his finger
Counselor-
up.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
No,
Thank you.
go ahead, sir.
Just very quickly, I will just finish. I just want to make clear, for me, it wasn't about the equipment negotiation. That's a sideshow. For me, it was just a principle of management versus the lease agreement. I just disagree with the risk proposal in good faith. I thought if we canceled the RFP, we could start over and find a new methodology. I just think that the methodology was wrong. It's not an indictment of the entire RFP process. The other thing I do want to say before we vote, because it may go, I think I may know the direction it's going. I want to be really clear for me, if this passes, I believe Landscape is going to do a great job, and I'll give them my full support. We debate policy, and we move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. A roll call vote, please. On the main motion, folks.
Council members Erickson.
Yes.
Erpenbach.
Yes.
Kylie.
Yes.
Neitzer.
No.
Rolfing.
Yes.
Selberg.
Yes.
Starr.
No.
Staley.
No.
That is passed 5-3. Council, any other business?
Move to adjourn.
Point of personal privilege, if I could.
Sure, Councilor Rolfe.
I have my daughter in the audience from Philadelphia who came down to see how city government works, along with my niece from Utah and a niece's daughter from Florida. And I want to recognize that they're here.
Welcome, Rolfe and family. Welcome. There has been a motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? This meeting is adjourned, Sioux Falls. Make it a great night.
Y'all come back now. Here.
Security, escort this gentleman out, please.
Come on, Soda Pop, let's go.